Okay, so we are starting this module 3, that is drafting. We are starting guidelines also for drafting appearance and pleading. It is also our module 1 and paper 3 basically. Sorry, module 1, paper 3, and it is as the name indicates, it contains provision for drafting, pleading, and what all other appearances which we need to consider. So it is really important topic for us to read. Now let's go back to the question. Here we have like the enumerate the usual parts or components or clause of a deed. They are taking that what all are the parts and component or clauses of a deed. So in this thing we learn that deed is basically a legal document that is signed and delivered. I'm having a little bit pain. Oh, it's I think comfortable. The deed is a legal document that is signed and delivered, especially one regarding the ownership of people, property, or legal right. Now, deed is basically the term normally used to describe all the instrument by which two or more persons agree to effect any right or liability in a legal sense. Deed is basically a solemn document. Deed is what? Deed is a solemn document. Okay. So a deed is divided into different paragraphs. Under each part, relevant and related information is put in a paragraph in simple and intelligible language. So basically in deed we know that every paragraph is related to some more new information and relevant information basically. If a particular part is not applicable in a particular case, then that part is omitted from the document. So if it is not applicable, then that part is omitted. Now the usual part or component or clause of a deed in general are mentioned as follows. So first we have description of title of deed, that what all are the description. Now place and date of execution of a deed, description of parties to the deed, now recitals, testatum, consideration, receipt clause, operative clause, description of properties, parcel clause, exception and reservations, premises and addendum, covenants and undertaking, testimonium clause. So these all are the parts of the deed that we need to consider while we were drafting the deed particularly. So these all are the things that we need to consider much. So it is the part, it is a usual part and component or clause of a deed in general. So I'm again reading this. That first is the description of a title deed. What all are the description? Then places and date of execution of a deed, and a description of parties to the deed, recital, testatum, consideration, receipt clause, operative clause, description of property कर दिया, parcel clause आ गया, exemption and reservation हो गया, now premises and addendum आ गया, covenant and undertakings आ गया, testimonium clause आ गया, then signature attestation होगा लास्ट में, endorsement होगा, supplement deed होगी अगर कुछ है तो, annexure of schedule होगा अगर कुछ है annexion के लिए. Now principle of res judicata and its impact on litigation. Now what is the principle of res judicata and what is its impact on the litigation? So sorry, that was papers question number C. Okay, let's moving to the question number C first, then we'll move to the B part. The principle of res judicata has been defined in section 11 of Code of Civil Procedure. So basically it is as per the section 11 of the Code of Civil Procedure, that is the principle of res judicata aims at bringing finality to the litigation. The basic principle is that the final judgment rendered by a court of a competent jurisdiction, now it is conclusive on merits as to right to the parties and constitute an absolute bar against subsequent action involving the same. Now the principle of res judicata applies only under following circumstances. Now the matter directly and substantially in issues has been directly or substantially in issue in a formal suit between same parties or whom they claim litigation under the same title. I'm again reading this from the starting. So there is that the principle of res judicata has been defined as per section 11 of the CPC. Now we know. Now the principle of res judicata aims basically to bringing finality to the litigation. It means finality to the litigation, final conclusion to the litigation. Now the basic principle is that the final judgment rendered by the court of competent jurisdiction means competent court है जो final jurisdiction दे रहा है, judgment दे रहा है उस केस में, is conclusive on merit as to right of the parties and constitute an absolute bar against subsequent action involving the same claim. Now the principle of res judicata applies only under the following circumstances. So what all are the circumstances under which a res judicata applies? So these are the two circumstances they have mentioned here, that the matter directly or substantially. We know that law is of a two types, substantial and procedural law. So the matter directly and substantially is in issue has been directly and substantially in issue has been in a former suit between the same parties or between whom they claim litigation under the same title. Now the matter is in the court competent to try such subsequent suit or suit in which such suit has been subsequently raised and has been heard and finally decided. Now the former suit means suit decided prior. Irrespective of the date of institution, the matter must be decided on merits. That is, the issue was alleged by one party and denied by other party. Now the principle of res judicata is one of convenience and not one of absolute justice. Now it should not be unduly conditioned and qualified by technical interpretations. To sum up, if we are summing up all these things, that it can be stated that no court will have the power to try any fresh suit or issue which has been already settled in the former suit between the same parties. यानी बार बार सेम मैटर को लेके हम कोर्ट में चले गए हैं, ठीक है. So this is the concept. Now we have a drafting part under question number B, and that drafting is of liquidator. Sale deed बनानी है basically. It is of a deed of sale liquidator by a company who has gone voluntary liquidation, and we need to assume facts here. We can assume accordingly, and it is of a 5 marks question. So we are reading this that it is a sale deed. Now a sale deed is made on this day. We mentioned first here sale deed. The deed is on first day of voluntary liquidator of company in involuntary liquidation hereinafter the vendor on the one part in favor of Shri, the son of Shri, occupation. Basically first we will give the description of the parties. Now we were elaborating the in detail that whereas a special resolution passed by the shareholder of the company in extraordinary general meeting held on this day of which notice has been prescribed by the law has been duly given. Notice has been given, and it was resolved that the company be wound up voluntarily. Company voluntarily wound up हो रही है. Now whereas the said vendor was appointed as voluntary liquidator, means voluntary liquidator appoint कर लिया on the notice whereof are duly submitted to the ROC. Notice has also been submitted to the ROC as prescribed by the law, means देना पड़ता है. On this day, and whereas in a meeting of a shareholders of the said company held in accordance with a provision of Companies Act 2013, it was resolved that the properties mentioned in the schedule annexed here to be sold by the vendor after publishing a notice for sale on this day in the daily newspaper twice within a period of fortnight. And pursuant to such resolution, the vendor has duly advertised the sale of said property in the issue of dated respectively, and the issue of dated respectively the pursuant thereto have received offers and higher whereof was that of the said purchaser. Now and whereas the said vendor agreed to sell and said purchaser agreed to purchase the said property on the terms and conditions mentioned herein and incorporated in an agreement to sell dated this. ये हम कर सकते हैं कि भाई conditions पे they both were agrees. Now this deed of sale witnesses, and it is hereby agreed and declared as follows: that pursuant to the agreement dated itna aforementioned, and in consideration of sum of rupees itna paid by the purchaser before the sub-registrar on presentation of this deed of sale for registration thereof, the receipt whereof the vendors hereby acknowledge, the vendor hereby transfer by way of sale and conveys on behalf of the said company all those items of the property mentioned more particularly in the schedule attached thereto. Now unto the said purchaser he hires and assigns to hold the same absolutely and forever, in witness whereof the parties aforementioned have signed the sale deed on the date, month and year aforementioned. Now what all are the witnesses? So witnesses 1, witnesses 2, and we'll discuss all other topics. We need to write this after, because drafting is need practice. Basically drafting is all about practice. So now we have a registrar of companies. Another question, that is D part from first question, that is registrar of companies, a primary regulatory authority for the company's comment on this statement. Means ROC is a primary regulatory authority. We know already, because ROC has authority of all primary documents. After ROC only another authority come into the picture, no? Now the registrar of companies is defined under now registrar of companies basically defined under section 2 subclause 75 of the Companies Act 2013. Registrar means a registrar, an additional registrar, joint registrar, deputy registrar or assistant registrar. Means registrar means registrar, additional registrar, joint registrar, deputy registrar or assistant registrar having the duty of registering the company and discharging various functions under this act. Now ROC appointed under section 396 of the Companies Act are vested with the, we don't have to remember all these sections, although we could write this section. This is to this section somewhere is important, that is 2 clause 75. We need to remember this, but this may not be necessary to remember. Now the ROC appointed under section 395 of the Companies Act 2013 are vested with the primary duty of registering companies in states and union territories and ensuring that the companies complying with statutory requirement under the act. These offices functions as a registry of records relating to the companies registered. Now the records are available for inspection for public on payment of prescribed fees. The central government exercises administrative control over these offices through the respective RDs. Hence, will be true that the ROC is a primary regulatory. We could write even more in this question. ROC के पास सारे documents submit होते हैं. ROC is basically primary regulatory because it has various. In every point, company has to report to the ROC for various things. Also, ROC have a jurisdiction power. We could write that also. Now, second is compounding power. They was talking about ROC as a compounding power. Now, what is write the short note on pre-incorporation contracts and ratification. So, pre-incorporation contract and ratification, we were discussing that Companies Act 2013 does not contain any provision about promoters contract. कंपनीज एक्ट में कोई प्रोविज़न नहीं है प्रमोटर्स कॉन्ट्रैक्ट में, और प्री इनकॉर्पोरेशन कॉन्ट्रैक्ट पहले बनते थे क्योंकि कंपनीज को बहुत टाइम लग जाता था, बट नाउ it is very lesser time that company requires now. सो कंपनीज एक्ट 2013 में कोई प्रोविजन ही नहीं है इससे रिलेटेड. सो प्रमोटर ऑफ द कंपनी यूजुअली एंटर्स इनटू कॉन्ट्रैक्ट टू एक्वायर सम प्रॉपर्टी और राइट ऑफ द कंपनी which is yet to be incorporated. Means that company has not been incorporated yet. Such contracts are called preliminary or pre-incorporation contract. The promoters generally enter into such contract as agents for the company about to be informed. Now the legal position is that since presence of two consenting parties is necessary for contract. Yes, two consent of the parties is consent of both the parties is necessary for such a contract. Now the company before incorporation is non-identity. Thus a promoter cannot act as an agent for the company which is yet to become into existence. Now such company is not liable for any act of the promoter because company has not been initiated. Now that all whatever be the act has been done by the promoter in the name of the company, but company is not even exist during that tenure. So done before its incorporation. When the company comes into existence, it is bound by the pre-incorporation contract even when it takes the benefit of the work done by on its behalf. Means that company has to, it is not bound by the company is not bound by the pre-incorporation contract जो उसके बेनिफिट के लिए काम किया गया. However, specific performance of contract between a third party and a promoter may be successfully claimed by a third party against a company when a company into possession of a property on the faith of the promoter's contract. Similarly, a company after incorporation cannot reinforce any contract made before its incorporation. ठीक है. After incorporation, company cannot enforce any contract made before its incorporation, which means company cannot sue or other party cannot sue the company. Company भी sue नहीं कर सकती, other party भी नहीं sue कर सकती to the contract if the other party fails to carry out the contract. Now the promoter remain personally liable here. Promoter is personally liable on the contract. Now company also cannot ratify a contract entered between the promoter and the third party, that the contract which is made on company's behalf. Therefore it cannot by adoption or ratification obtain the benefit of contract purporting to have been made on its behalf before it came into existence, as ratification by the company when formed is legally impossible. कुछ अलग ही बोल दिया इन्होंने बोल दिया कि वो चीज़ कभी हो ही नहीं सकती है. प्रमोटर ही उसके लिए पर्सनली लाइबल रहेगा, कंपनी उसके लिए कभी लाइबल होगी ही नहीं क्योंकि वो इम्पॉसिबल है रेटिफाई कराना, अडॉप्ट करना. ठीक है. सो आई विल चेक दिस थिंग अगैन बिकॉज इट मे बी कि सर्टेनली ये चेंजेस हो गए हों, और अदरवाइज़ ये हो जाता था कि वो अडॉप्ट करके उसको चेंज हो जाता था कंपनी के नाम पे. सो नाउ वी हैव अनदर क्वेश्चन दैट इज़ power of parliament to delegate and limitations of law making role in the parliament. So what are the parliament power which delegate and what all are the limitations of law making role of the parliament? So here we need to discuss the power of the parliament and also delegate and limitations of law making role of the parliament. Expected है क्वेश्चन काफ़ी बड़ा होगा. So in a view of multifarious activities of a welfare state, in a view of multifarious activities of a welfare state, the legislature cannot work all details to fit the varying aspects of complex situation. It must necessarily delegate the work out of the details to the executive or any other agency. Therefore, one of the most significant development of the present century is the growth in the legislative powers of the executive. Means executives basically the growth in the legislative power of the executive. मतलब executive की जो legislative power है उसमें growth हो रहा है. ठीक है. There is no such general power granted to the executive to make law. It is supplement the law under the authority of legislature. Means it is only the supplement of the law that the authority of the legislator, that the supplement. This supplement legislation is known as delegation legislation or subordinate legislation. Now the development of legislative powers of the administrative authorities in the form of the delegated legislation occupies very important place in the study of administrative law. So the parliament cannot supply the necessary quantity or quality of legislative for cannot supply the necessary quantity and quality legislation for effective running of the country. Now, some of the limitations of the law-making role of the parliament. What all are the limitations of the law-making power of the parliament? It is very important question. Being in citizens, we also need to know about this. Now, the parliament conducts sessions only for a limited period time, whereas the complexity of modern administration require there must be a law-making body available on tap. So it should be readily available. They want to say here is, but parliament have sessions only for the limited period. Certainly emergency situation may arise which necessitates special measure. In case speedy and appropriate action is required, parliament cannot act quickly because of its political nature and structure, because of the time required by the parliament to enact the law. Now the volume of a business of a parliament has increased and it has no time for consideration of complicated and technical matters. Now the parliament cannot provide the society with the requisite legislation because of the lack of time. Most of the time of the parliament is devoted to political matters. Yes, definitely. So matters of policies and particularly foreign affairs. Okay, so certain matters covered by delegated legislation are of a technical nature basically, which require handling by experts. So experts are basically handling that delegated legislation. So in such case, it is inevitable that the powers to deal with such matter is given to the appropriate administrative agencies to be exercised according to the requirement of subject matter. Now the legislator cannot provide for such matter as the members are at the best politicians and not experts in various spheres of the life. So here certain matters basically covered by the legislative and expert opinion, or and it is handled by the experts. So in those cases it is inevitable that the power which we deal with such matters is basically given to the appropriate administrative agencies which are basically specialized on that particular topics. Now the legislature cannot provide for such matters as the members are at best politician. Basically they are politicians, not an expert on various spheres and various topics. So it is better that they delegate this power to the expert so that experts give their best to deal with it, because as they are politicians basically. So now the parliament while dealing upon certain courses of actions cannot foresee the difficulties which may be encountered in its execution. Accordingly, various various statutes contain a removal of difficulty clause, now empowering the administration to remove such difficulties by exercising the power of making rules and regulations. These clauses are always be worded that are wide powers are given to the administrations. Now the practice of delegation legislation ensures flexibility in the law. Now the rules and regulations, if it is found to be defective, can be modified quickly, experiments can be made, and experience can be profitably utilized. Here the practice of delegated legislation introduce flexibility in the law. So law is now flexible here, that now the rules and regulations found to be defective can be modified quickly, and experiments can be made, and experience can be profitably utilized here in this case. So where they are basically mentioning the what all are the advantages that that parliament have after delegative legislature. So we are moving another question, that is question number 2 and 3. I think we have to start that question in another lecture. Thank you.